Thank you, Robin, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all today from wherever you may be joining in for this webinar titled Presenting a Data Wizard for the Protected Planet Database. I'm going to begin today just with a little bit of background on this effort to get us started and before we jump into the introduction and demonstration of the tool. So as you all must be very aware, one of the most persistent challenges for land conservation around the world is accurately reflecting the coverage of protected and conserved areas. And this holds us back from understanding what's currently protected, prioritizing areas for future conservation efforts, and assessing change over time, as well as progress towards goals like 30 by 30, the goal to protect 30% of the planet's lands and waters by 2030. And this challenge is even more acute when it comes to understanding the coverage of private and civic land conservation that meet the criteria of privately protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. There are multiple intersecting elements that create these challenges, and some, but importantly not all, of these elements can be addressed through building data solutions that support practitioners, organizations, and governments working at different scales in the existing reporting process to the World Database on Protected Areas, which is hosted by the UN Environment Programme's World Conservation Monitoring Center and is better known as Protected Planet. So the data wizard that my colleague will demonstrate here shortly is one such solution. The challenge that this web application or tool tackles is that organizations collect and store data in different formats in different ways. And when submitting data to Protected Planet or the WDPA, this data must be formatted to meet the Protected Planet data model and standards. And so over the past year and a half, the ILCN has partnered with our colleagues at the Lincoln Institute Center for Geospatial Solutions to develop an online user interface that allows entities reporting data sets of various complexity to transform their data to meet these standards more easily and, we hope, more efficiently. So this web application was developed in consultation with the folks at WCMC. It is intended to support existing reporting processes to Protected Planet, as I mentioned, and it's not an official or a mandatory part of reporting. It's really intended to help practitioners in one element of the reporting process. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Kyle Onda from the Center for Geospatial Solutions. Kyle oversees open source technology development and stakeholder engagement in support of the Internet of Water, which is a national public and private sector effort to modernize and connect water-related data in the United States. He and his team used the technology they developed for the Internet of Water here to build the tool that you'll see today. So Kyle, over to you to demonstrate the data wizard in action.
Thanks, Jenny. So let me set my screen share up. Whoop. There we go. Okay. And sharing. So, like Trendy said, so normally I work on the Internet of Water project, which deals with a lot of analogous problems with lots of people everywhere storing data differently and them needing to submit to national or regional databases. They need to conform to some data standard, and that can be complicated to do. So this wizard is designed to be like a helper process that formats the data that in whatever format that it initially comes from a data providing organization, have it sort of come out the other side in a standard format with some documentation so that you can then, so then that organization would be able to take that data package and then go through the normal formal process with Protected Planet to submit it. So the application is available at internetofwater.shinyapps.io/WDPA-OECM-wizard for now. And I would consider this like a beta launch. It's functional. We've tested it on a variety of data sources. But I'm sure improvements could be made, and I encourage folks who voice. I encourage folks to try it out, and if there's things you don't like about it, to let the team at the Lincoln Institute know. Um, so I'll just give a run through of it. So when you go to that webpage first, you'll see the introduction splash page, which kind of gives a little overview of everything we've said so far. Has some links to IUCN and Protected Planet resources already. Gives a brief explanation of what's going to happen. Um, so, which I'll go through right here. The first step is choosing whether you're preparing data uh, for the WDPA, the World Database in Protected Areas, or the OECM database. The required fields are slightly different between the two databases. And then the next step, you would fill out a source, what they call a source table, which is essentially some metadata that is about the data set about conservation areas. Um, Second step is you need to upload a geospatial file. I will note, to start at all, you need to have a geospatial file, which is a requirement for the WDPA. But any geospatial file, shape files, geodatabases, GeoJSON files, KML files are all acceptable and will work. And then a step 3 is sort of a column renaming and data validation and correction stage. So I will demo that all shortly. I'll also point out that we have links here to an actual data submission guide. So if you click this, it will download a PDF, which is over here, which gives like the very detailed guidance on exactly what kinds of data need to be there. And then for reference as you use the tool, and then similarly an Excel file which describes uh, the fields and the data standards themselves. This is what you would need to normally do manually, and it's what the tool facilitates, but the actual official documentation is provided for reference. So the first step would be choosing WDPA, and then you'd click Get Started. The second step is filling out the metadata table. So with all of these fields that are required, I won't go through the whole thing right now. I've disabled the validation steps so you don't have to watch me fill out everything for the purposes of this demo. But these are all requirements, and the definitions of those fields are displayed. So you would fill all this out and then save the metadata to proceed. Next, you would upload your file. So I have a file here of the protected areas in the town I live in. It would upload, and then it would display it in a map so you could kind of see what the areas in the data set are. The attribute table associated with the geometries is, you can toggle that on by just clicking on the areas just to verify that your file is what you think it is, basically. The next step is applying mapping. So here the idea is you may have columns in your existing data that do correspond to the required fields in the Protected Planet Data Standard. So like a simple one would be name. Each of these is a drop-down menu that is populated with the column headers in the data that you just uploaded. So in this one, it says the name of the protected area assigned in legal texts by its governance authority. So then I would choose the column name that corresponds to in my state data set, which is probably this one. And you could go down the list and do that for all of them. I think designation is, local designation, for example. Designation type is another field, right? So you can see this is the case where you have columns that map directly. This sort of column is for the fields that are required. There are also optional fields that would make your data set a little more complete. which I believe my example data set has a couple of those. And again, all the tooltips are there to define what the variables are, but also are available in that Excel sheet, which you could download on the first step for reference. Then you would apply when you're satisfied. You might not have all the columns either way, and that is fine. The application could deal with that. You would apply the mapping. You get a little table that says these are the fields that have been added to your data set, which are actually filled out by UNEP WCMC when you upload things to the Protected Planets official portal. And it also lets you know which fields were unmapped and will not show up in the download. So now we have this table, so you have a tabular view of the whole data set you uploaded and all of the columns that are required in the data set that your data set was not mapped to. You can now validate as a first step. And when you validate, columns will be columns that are grayed out are columns that are just unmapped and so will not show up when you download your data package. And this is all of this is explained in this text. Columns in red, or cells in red rather, are where there's some sort of error. So a good example here is the field designation type. I have an error here where in my data set this cell said LREC, right? But the data standard, if you hover over it, says the error, it must be one of national, regional, international, or not applicable. And so you can actually double click on those types of fields and then choose from the allowed values. And then if you were to validate again, every time you make a correction, you can validate as many times as you want, those errors go away. And then that works for all of the data types. You see the types, the columns in blue are the ones that we've added that UNEP WCMC will fill out, so you don't have to be bothered by that. And then there are other fields where, like the area, that are probably just numerical. So you put, oh wow, my keyboard isn't working anymore, so that's fine. Very cool. Well, I can just click around. That's okay. Can validate that again. All right, that's truly just a problem. Like, okay, there we go. So numbers, put a number in, validate again, and then that error goes away. So you can sort of go through your whole data set. We've tested this on data sets of up to 3,000 features. The table will just continue kind of scrolling down, and you can clear all the errors. Optional fields that you have not filled out are filled out in yellow, are sort of alerted in yellow, but you can, again, fill that out according to either the drop-down menus, or if they're free text entry, you can fill in the free text. And then if you were to validate that, again, the yellow highlighting would go away. So once you've done all that, you can click download package, and it will download a zip file. And then I'll show you what's in the zip file. So here is my downloaded page. This zip file was downloaded, and then I've unzipped it. And if you open the directory, you'll notice a few things. You'll notice a README file, which describes everything that you've just downloaded. And it's going to say everything I'm about to say to you, so I won't read it out loud. It has the source table, so that metadata field that you filled out. It will have a validation report. So if you downloaded a file that you didn't clear all the errors, it will sort of have a report of all the errors associated with each row and column. And then it will have a shapefile version of the corrected data set and a GeoJSON version, I think either of which would be acceptable to Protected Planet. Yeah, I'm just looking at the GeoJSON because it's free text, um, where we've seen, right, you have all of the columns with the appropriate names in the data standard, and where I filled in that nonsense value. So that's what you would get. And this should be easy enough to submit to the Protected Planet through their process, which I think you have to register for. So I will stop there if there's any questions. But that's the demo. And again, the application is available for download. Maybe we can put this in the chat. Hopefully that works. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kyle. Thanks so much for that. And to clarify, the last step of this process, you will be able to download a file, download the package, and then we may add some language here at the end to instruct you users of this web application to then take the next steps with submitting to Protected Planet. All right. Thank you, everybody. Again, please do let us know if you have feedback as you start to use this tool, and thanks for joining us today for this demo. Thanks, Kyle. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.